Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Hewitt and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. And for those of you who haven't joined us for a webinar before, Connecting Up and TechSoup facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. And you can check out our upcoming webinars on both of the websites. So welcome today to the webinar End of Year Reports for NFPs with Mick Devine from CalCFA. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping today. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and I should be able to help you. And if you have any questions during the session, please also type these into the questions box and we'll have a Q&A session that will be coming up at the end of today's webinar. And please note that your comments and questions aren't visible to the rest of the group. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the sound in the video, so please just close any programs that you're not using. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording towards the end of today. And before we start, I'd just like to remind you that there's a short survey that comes up at the end of today's webinar, and we'd really appreciate any feedback that you could leave. Thank you very much, and that's all from me. I will pass over to Mick to get things started.
Thanks, Jane, and good morning, everybody. Welcome. So we're going to talk about end of year reporting today, and while I'm going to use CalCFA for the examples I'm going to show you, these are reports that you could, in theory, produce in Excel. You could draw them on a piece of paper. It's not rocket science. So doesn't matter what technology you use to produce them. It's the end result and the contents that's the important part of it. So I guess what we generally do with end of year reports is a bit of looking back at the year that's just finished, seeing how well we've done, what's happened, what's not happened, and then also some looking forward to the next year that's coming up. So I'll talk about some general principles that I tend to use when I'm putting together a set of end of year reports, the things to look for, the things to include, and then we'll look at some examples. So in terms of looking back at the year that you've just finished, I guess one of the key things that one of the key questions that people will ask is, how well did we do compared to our expectations? And those expectations are generally turned into numbers in our budgets. So, did we spend what we budgeted to spend on the services that we planned to provide, or our funders expected us to provide? Did we overspend in some areas? Did we raise the income that we needed to raise? If we had plans to become more independent with our funding and do some more fundraising, how did that go? And especially in an uncertain and changing world like we've had in the last 12 months, some funding was hard to get. Others, there were government programs that weren't there beforehand that some organizations were able to take advantage of, others not so well. So, I think one thing that we have observed over the last 12 months is that, the effects of the pandemic have been different on not just the not-for-profit sector, but different areas within the not-for-profit sector. The arts and social services have had quite different experiences, and I've seen organizations that have grown and prospered, others that have struggled, some who've closed. But so when we're reporting, it is very much about looking back at what we've done, comparing it to what we expected to do, and then talking about what lessons you want to learn from that. I mean, the numbers are only important if you're going to add some interpretation to them and come up with some different plans. You know, if mistakes were made in the last 12 months, you don't want to make the same mistakes next year. And I think so sometimes I see end of year reports where it's all very much just profit and loss compared to budget, you know, actuals, budget, variance. But I think sometimes including some KPIs in those reports can really help to bring out some features of what's happened. You know, looking at ratios like wages compared to income, those sort of things, and seeing how they've varied over the year, seeing how they vary between different programs or projects, looking at that. And you know, the thing with KPIs is that it does, you know, they are very individual. You know, yes, you know, every disability organization will tend to measure the same sort of things, but it also depends on the life cycle of your business. Are you a new and growing organization? Are you one that's been around for 20, 30, 50 years and you're a different growth stage, or you're stable? So it's about picking the KPIs that are important for your organization. And then I think there's a summary and a detail thing that you need to get right with your end of year reporting, and that will depend a bit on who you're reporting to. If you're reporting to a board or senior management, it's the summary level information on the whole organization. If you're reporting to a program or department manager, it's a bit more detail on their area, and possibly with the organization summary attached or something, you know, and that will depend a lot on the culture of your organization and people's expectations and what they can or can't do with that information. And I think one of the key things to do with your end of year reports when you're looking back is to look not just at the whole year compared to the budget, but also look at trends within the year, you know, so that you can look back and get an understanding of which were the good months, which were the bad months, are there, and then what can we learn from that for next year? What can we do differently next year? You know, were there months where income was low, but we still had fixed expenses like rent and staff and that sort of thing, and cash flow was tight for that period? How can we better manage that next year? So I think it's important to look at those monthly trends when you're looking back at the last year and see how that's gone. And then comparing against the budget is one thing, but it also makes sense to compare against the previous year. And yes, I know that the last 12 months has been quite different to many years for many of us, but it's still, I think, important to know, you know, it's simplistic to say, you know, yes, we know this year was worse than last year, or this year was better than last year in some cases, but can we get more granular than that? Were there some income lines that were better or worse than last year? And then is there something that we can put in place to alleviate that in the next year? Were there some expenses that were higher or lower in the last 12 months than in the previous years? What are we going to do with that information? What does it tell us about what might happen in the next 12 months? It's about what we can learn from this information that we put together. What do we expect our senior managers, what do we expect our board members to learn and understand from those numbers? And I think, as well as looking at, the P&L type reports, we also need to look at the balance sheet side of the organization. What's happening with our bank balance? Are we building up cash reserves? Could we cope with a 3-month lockdown with no income, for example? And the whole concept of measuring your cash reserves in days always used to be a very theoretical construct until last year. It became very real for many organizations where income did dry up suddenly and they had to make decisions about whether or not they could keep going and how long they could keep going for. So I think it's important that as not-for-profit organizations build those reserves and have that money for a rainy day. And it's quite possible that you've depleted those reserves to some extent in the last 12 months, but that then wants a plan for how are we going to build them up again so we can cope with the next crisis. Then again, looking at the balance sheet, comparing the assets and liabilities to the previous year. Does it look healthier? Does it look less healthy? Again, what action do we need to take on that so we can move forward and ensure the sustainability of the organization for the next year, the next 5 years, the next 20 years? And then it's also important to look at the solvency of the organization. Are your suppliers getting paid? Is the government getting paid on time? If not, are there arrangements being made so that those shortfalls are being managed? Are there any, long-term outstanding creditors that need somebody's attention, that need sorting out before they cause major financial damage to the organization? And then I guess it's an opportunity to look at your expenses generally line by line. You probably do it as part of the budgeting process, which many people will have already done as over the last few months as you approach the end of the financial year. But if you haven't, now's the time to do that. And especially the big ticket items, which in many service organizations, which most not-for-profits are, it's people. Have we got the right people in the right places, in the right programs, in the right departments? Do we need to redeploy them from one area to another? Are we making the best use of their skills and talents, and that sort of thing? So it's an opportunity to review, assess, and look at what might need to change over the coming months. And then, as I said, it's not just looking at the overall numbers, the reports that you might put together for the AGM, which are sort of very high level summary information. you do need to summarize information for boards and senior management, because they will have lots of stuff to read even when you do summarize it, and you want to make sure that you're presenting them with readable reports that they can, you know, it's giving them enough detail so they can make decisions and understand what's happening, but not so much that they just drown in that detail and get lost in it, especially when you've got board members that are, potentially not particularly financially literate. That's the nature, especially in not-for-profit organizations, that people are appointed to boards for a whole range of reasons, and not necessarily because they know how to read a balance sheet or they understand financial information. So those of us who are tasked with providing them with that financial information, I think, have a duty to provide them with something that's readable and understandable, so that even as a non-accountant, a non-financial person, they can understand it and know whether things are good, bad, or indifferent. And then within the organization, you've then got the program managers who need detail on what's worked, what's not worked on their area. And I think it makes sense for those people to have detail so that they can look at what has happened, reflect on what needs to change for the coming months, that sort of thing. So then it comes to looking ahead at the next year. And again, some of you may have already prepared your budgets for next year, or you're in the process of doing that. But then there's a question of, how do you present that? And again, I think it's about tailoring that information for your audience and giving them the right level of detail for what they want. And I think giving them some sort of perspective. One of the things I learned long ago is that financial numbers on their own are generally fairly hard to understand. You can look at a profit and loss type report and you see income less expenses is profit or loss, and that's either positive or negative, and you can make some sense of that. But other numbers, and even the profit and loss, makes a lot more sense when you compare it to something else, like last year, like last month, like comparing it to a budget, etc. So I like to present budgets for next year and show a comparison to how we've actually done this year, so that the board members who are approving that budget know what the expected change is over this year, and then they can ask sensible questions about, why is this changing this way? Why is that changing? And you can have an informed discussion rather than just giving them a set of numbers and saying, this is the budget, sign off, please. And when you're looking forward, I think it also makes sense, again, to look at the solvency of the organization. The board has a responsibility to make sure that the organization is solvent, not going bankrupt. So they need a cash flow forecast. They need to know that there's going to be money in the bank for the next 12 months, that there are plans to fund all the different activities the organization is involved in. So what we do in Calxa, just for those of you who may not have heard of us, is provide a reporting solution which is used by many not-for-profit organizations. And we link to the main accounting systems like MYOB, Xero, QuickBooks, but we also work with some of the larger systems like NetSuite and MYOB Advanced, that sort of thing. And we give you a suite of reports that you can tailor to your needs. You then put them into a bundle which saves all your configuration, etc. And then once you've got that bundle ready, you can just run it at any time. And I might just show you some examples. And in the handout section, there is a download there where you can download a PDF of these reports that I'm about to show you. So you can take it away and have a look later and, construct something similar yourselves. You'll decide. You might not, I'm not suggesting that every report in this sample is necessary for every single organization, but it's about taking what makes sense for your organization and then tailoring it to your needs. So as I said, we have 150 something different report templates, and you can run them at the organization level or the business unit level or whatever, and then you put together a bundle of reports which saves all that configuration. And here's the one I prepared earlier. So might take you through some of these reports and talk a little bit about why I think they're useful, when they're useful, who they're useful for, and then we can have a bit of a discussion afterwards about your thoughts, your experiences. So a cover page is just simple, or as complex as you want. And I think some sort of executive summary commentary on reports also goes down well, especially again when you're dealing with people in your team that may not be used to financial reports and understanding and reading them. So giving them those words to go with it, I think always adds to the numbers. I am an accountant, not that they let me near the accounts these days, but even as accountants, we have to recognize that it's not all about numbers. It's about the meaning of those numbers and what they tell us about what's happening in the organization. So, the simple starting point is something that shows us the actuals against budget for the year. I mean, and I'm just looking at this now and I'm already thinking I would have chosen a different report if I'd actually thought about it a bit harder. And I wouldn't have shown the June month, because that's probably irrelevant unless it's part of a monthly reporting meeting as well. But actuals, budget, variance, and it's simple, it's traditional, but it does tell you how you went against your expectations that you set at the beginning of the year. And possibly you might want to compare two different budgets. You might want to compare actuals against the budget that you set right at the beginning of the year, and then the reforecast that you did halfway through the year or 3/4 of the way through the year, and combine those into the one report. So there's different variations on all of these themes depending on your particular needs, but ultimately, the board have signed off on the budget at the beginning of the year as the plan, the expectations for what the next 12 months was going to bring. it makes sense that you then present them with the results of how we did go against that budget. And there's all sorts of reasons, especially in a pandemic year, for variations, but they want explaining. And, you know, again, the level of detail will depend on your audience and what they need. So, you know, in this case, I've summarized most of my accounts just to put all this onto a one-page report, just to keep it simple for the audience, and also not to overwhelm you with pages and pages of detail. And then I've added some KPIs on the bottom here, one for our cash balance and one for our cash reserves in days. And you'll see my cash balance is 263,000, whereas according to our budget, it would have been 3.5 million if things had worked out the way we planned at the beginning of the year. And our cash reserves are only 269 days compared to 835 that was originally planned. But even 269 days is reasonably healthy by most scales. I mean, generally, you know, in most cases, you would say if there was less than 90 days there, then that's a cause for concern, and you're vulnerable to cash flow issues. You're vulnerable to, you know, sudden drops in income. And then it also makes sense, as I said, to compare to the previous year. So actuals this year, actuals for the previous year, dollar variance and percentage variance. Some people like percentage variances, some people like dollar variances, some people like both. But those are the choices that you'll make depending on your audience and what they're used to, what they like, what makes sense to them. You know, and maybe, you know, we do have options where you can, you know, highlight rows that have a variance of more than a particular percentage or a dollar amount or something, again, to bring that attention to the person who, you know, is at risk of being lost in the detail. And again, I've got some different KPIs on there, admin to revenue, wages to turnover. So you can, again, review those. And as I said, last year, month by month, I find it useful in my business, in most of the organizations that I've dealt with over the years, when you're reviewing the year, to just scan along and look at those trends. I mean, this one, that funding looks fairly stable from month to month, but when you compare the end of year total with what the original budget was, there's a big difference there. And again, that's something that wants some explanation, some commentary, and something to be discussed. So reviewing those trends and looking at where the highs and lows are over the year. And again, you can look at trends in KPIs over the years from month to month and see how they varied. And then, as I said, I think it's important to also look at the balance sheet side of things. You know, how much cash do we have in the bank? And like I said earlier, I think especially balance sheets, and especially when you give them to non-accountants, just a balance sheet on its own, it can be hard for them to understand what's good, what's bad, what's a problem, what's not a problem. So that's why I tend to do my balance sheet reports comparing to another period. And I think when you're doing end of year reporting, the logical period to compare to is the end of the previous year. You know, so how much has the cash at bank changed? In this case, it's increased by 8%. our debtors, outstanding debtors, have increased considerably. Is that because we've changed the way we operate, or is it a problem because we're not collecting our debtors? As a board member, I'd look at that and I'd at least be asking questions and wanting to know why. Whereas if I'd just seen that figure on its own, I wouldn't have had the same context and it wouldn't have prompted the same questions. And then again, it helps people understand, how much tax and super is outstanding, payables. It's similar to, in my case, it's exactly the same as last year, but is it the same as last year? Is it similar? Is it different? But I think by providing the balance sheet information to your board or your senior managers, you're giving them that holistic view of the business, and you're helping to educate them on that whole finance side of things, so they do start to understand and appreciate what happens. And then, where did our money go? We created this report to try and help the non-accountants we deal with understand the connection between the net profit or surplus and the bank movement. So in this case, we've made a profit of 134,000 and our bank's only increased by 52,000. Why is that? Because we haven't collected our receivables, and we've paid a whole bunch of GST and funded that a little bit by having a bit more super outstanding. So from an accounting perspective, it's showing the balance sheet movements for that period, but trying to make it understandable to a non-accountant. And then the bank movement report chart, numbers are great, and especially when you want the detail, numbers are great. But for non-accountants, non-financial people, often pictures can tell that story better. And so I would sprinkle lots of charts into my end of year reporting, and they still have to be relevant charts. It's not just do charts for the sake of doing charts, or people will stop looking. But this one shows the bank at the beginning of the year, and then the income coming in, and you can clearly see there grant funding is our biggest source of income, and then cost of goods and expenses going out. And again, it's clear that the biggest expense for this organization is staff costs, and then we end up at the closing bank, and we can see in this case that's slightly higher than the opening bank. So it's about presenting that information in different ways to try and help your audience understand it. And again, this one, we could show that P&L report month by month for the year, but this one shows our total expenses month by month, broken down by these different headings. So again, we can see that our main expense most months is staff costs, and then admin, and then it varies a little bit between whether operations are more than marketing, and there's a bit there for office expenses, which tends to be fairly consistent from one month to the next. So it's about presenting that information and trying to make it readable, understandable to your audience. And then there are, even at senior management level, you still want to have some handle on how are all the different programs that we run going, how are the departments going. You've given me the overall actual against budget and actual against last year, but let's break it down. Is each program doing what it's expected to do? Is each department operating the way we planned. But at the same time, as a board member, I don't necessarily want a detailed profit and loss or detailed actual compared to budget for every single department for the year. So I like to use these summary type reports where, in this case, we just do one line for each program showing income, expense, profit, budget and actual for the month year to date. So you can see what were the expectations, what was the actual result, which programs did better than expected, which ones did worse. And then maybe you want detail on the ones that were problematic, or the ones that were wildly different from the expectations. But for the first look, that summary is sufficient for most purposes. And especially if it's something that you see every month, so you know as the year goes on what's working, what's not working. But you can do that without having to get drowned in the detail. And then again, I've got a chart here showing income by our different programs. So actuals compared to budget. And, you'll see in this case, my budget's quite different to my actuals. This program here was expected to contribute a large part of our income, but ended up just a small one, whereas this one was actually turned out to be more important and was originally planned to be quite small. And those are the things that will happen. I mean, in my sample file has funny numbers, but yours will probably be less wild than that. Although, in a pandemic year, it's quite possible that some of your programs received extra funding and were well resourced, others less so. So there may have been, in the last 12 months, some more dramatic changes from budget to what you were normally used to. And then the other thing I like to do when I'm looking back is not just look back at 1 year, but go back 5 years or maybe even 10 years, depending on, how long your organization's been around, how easy that information is to get hold of. But, so you can see, we've looked at how the year just ended was compared to the previous year. We've looked at it compared to budget, but, are there any long-term trends there of, things going up, things going down, or, was the last 12 months a complete aberration? And, and you say that's just the COVID experience, and we're hoping it's over, and we'll see what the next 12 months brings. But I think it's important to understand that year's results in the context of the previous year. And in this case, I've shown the next year as well. So I'm looking back at 4 years and forward at 1. Again, to provide some context on this year's numbers, so you can see what's gone before, what are we expecting to go afterwards, and then you can make some judgments about whether you think these are good numbers, bad numbers. I mean, numbers themselves aren't generally good or bad. It's was the result, was what happened in the organization positive, negative, neutral? Do we need to change things because of it? And then, as I said, looking forward, you want that cash flow forecast. You want to make sure that the organization's going to be solvent. And, in this case, I've done it as a chart so that you're looking, you're presenting this information and saying to the board, this is what we expect our bank balance to be month by month for the next 12 months. And, and maybe we're receiving funds early in the year, you know, which we then expend as the year goes on and end up back somewhere around where we started. And that's quite common in many organizations. You get grants on an annual basis, sometimes a 6-monthly basis, those sort of things, depending on the nature of your funding. And then you spread it out over the years. But so, you know, depending on my audience, I will produce either a chart for the cash flow forecast or a report, and the report may be a summarized one for most of the board members, or if it's for the treasurer, I may give the treasurer the detailed one because that's her speciality and she wants the detail. So it's about tailoring this information to the right audience. And then again, the balance sheet forecast, understanding that balance sheet, what's happening. And I usually advise non-accountants when they're looking at that balance sheet forecast, because they can look blankly at it the first time they look at it, to just look at, you know, the opening balance and then the expected closing balance, and just do a reasonableness test on it. You know, our debtors are going from 53,000 to 91,000. Is that because our, you know, and I haven't got a P&L forecast here, but I'd be looking at the P&L forecast and saying, is that because our income's going to be increasing and therefore we'll be invoicing more people and there will be more invoices outstanding at the end of any one month? So look at that, see whether it makes sense, and then that gives you then confidence in the reasonableness of the cash flow forecast. And then finally, you also want to present next year's budget to your board, your senior managers, and again, it's that context thing. So, you know, the budget for next year compared to the actuals for this year, last year, or, you know, whatever the previous year is. And, you know, in Calcs we have reports where you can do this just on, you know, I've summarized this one just on the whole year, but you can also do it month by month and compare to this year's actuals or this year's budgets, those sort of things. But, you know, whether you're doing it in Calcs or doing it in a spreadsheet, the principles are the same. It's about gathering that information, arranging it, presenting it in a way that makes sense to your audience and that they can understand it and has the right level of detail for them. So that's the end of my examples there. As I said, you can download that from the handout section in the control panel. Jane, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Mick. Yeah, we have one from Nicole. Is there a preference for percentage or dollars in variance? Is one better for a board?
I don't think so. You know, you talk to some people who want to see the absolute variance in dollar terms. Other people want to see it in percentage terms. I think it is very much a personal preference. I don't think there's a right or wrong there. I mean, it's sometimes governed by what they've had last year and the year before and the year before, and sometimes that's, you know, that's valid because it's familiar and they recognize, you know, they know that a 5% difference is normal, but a 25% one isn't. Whereas, you know, is $100 difference or $1,000 difference a problem or not? Familiarity, I think, is important with reporting, and I think so. I wouldn't radically change things. On the other hand, I've known board members who insist that any new reports have to look exactly the same as the last one, even down to the shading and the colors and all that sort of thing, and that that winds me up a little bit. But Thank you, Nicole. Hope that answers that one.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Anything else, Jane?
Yeah, Bruce is asking, can you produce a Tier 3 performance report from CalCSA for reporting to charities services?
Yes, this is a New Zealand question, I think. Yes, the answer is yes. Have I got one here? We can provide. We have I got it turned on? I haven't. We have an option in our report bundle kits, which I haven't turned on in this one, where you can produce it, and we provide the main structure for it. And there's still a bit of additional information that you need to add in, but we pulled together all the bits with numbers. There's a help note with some instructions on what KPIs and things you need, and then you can edit the documents with the text parts. So, and I haven't got any numbers in this one for this year, but the basic answer is yes, we'll give you a good starting point. We can't produce everything because we don't have all the information available, but what we have available we can put together, and then you add in the extra bits afterwards.
Lovely, thank you very much. That's all we have at the moment. If anybody has any questions they would like Mick to answer, please do get them in. And thank you very much, Mick. That was really interesting. And do you have your contact details on the screen? So
Ooh, I've been slack. I haven't.
that's all right.
Let me, yeah. You will
Oh, sorry.
find.
There's just one more question
Yep.
from Peter. For non-professional finance reporting, what checking process should be employed to ensure data is acceptable?
I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Peter, but I think at the end of the day, is that information understandable to the audience? Do they understand the content of the information? And so I think it is about tailoring that reporting to the right level of detail. You know, should it be charts and graphs, or should it be numbers? Should the numbers be summarized and presented clearly? And the ultimate test of whether those reports are any good or not is does the audience understand it? I'm not totally sure if I've understood your question correctly there, Peter, but happy to follow up if you need to.
Lovely, thank you. He just
Yeah.
said that. Thank you. That's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the other thing I was going to say is that we do a donation of CalCSA through TechSoup and Connecting Up. There's a free trial on the website, and for those who don't qualify for the donation, there is a discount through TechSoup and Connecting Up as well. So talk to them and they'll be able to look after you. And the website's calxa.com, CALXA, which you can see down the bottom of the screen there, .com, and you'll find plenty of contact information there. Talk to us, we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Lovely, thank you very much, Mick. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And as I said at the beginning, you'll be receiving a copy of the slides and this recording towards the end of today. And please do take a minute to fill in the survey at the end of the webinar. That would be really great. So thank you everybody and have a great day. Thanks, Mick.
Okay, thanks Jane, thanks everybody.